London, June 1817. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of the Wyndham townhouse drawing room, casting long shadows across the worn Aubusson carpet. The rug was threadbare in places, a silent testament to the family's reduced circumstances since the late Viscount's death 3 years prior. They remained in the house only by the grace of a distant cousin who had inherited the title, but preferred his country estate. Lady Wyndham sat rigid in her chair, her fingers white against the armrests, while her 3 eldest daughters arranged themselves like porcelain figurines on the settee opposite their visitor. The Earl of Kingsley stood by the fireplace, his tall frame casting an imposing silhouette against the marble mantel. At 36 years of age, he possessed the kind of cold, aristocratic beauty that made young debutantes whisper behind their fans. Silver threaded through the dark hair at his temples, and his gray eyes held the distant quality of winter frost. They called him the Stone Earl, and watching him now, Lady Wyndham understood why. He had come to make an offer. Not of love, not of courtship, but of transaction. And Lady Wyndham, desperate to secure her daughters' futures with their dwindling funds, had agreed to receive him. It was then that the drawing-room door burst open with a violence that made every occupant startle. If stories of love that defy society's cruelest judgments move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You will not want to miss what happens next. Miss Felicity Wyndham stood in the doorway, and she was an utterly disheveled spectacle. Mud caked the hem of her dress and splattered across her bodice. Her red hair had escaped its pins entirely, tumbling around her shoulders in wild curls that caught the afternoon light like copper fire. Freckles scattered across her nose and cheeks, and her chest heaved with exertion, suggesting she had walked at a furious pace from wherever she had been, unable to afford a hackney coach. "Mama, we have a crisis at the Foundling Hospital," she announced, seemingly oblivious to the frozen tableau before her. 3 of the older children have developed fever. The hospital's supply of medicines is entirely exhausted due to the outbreak. Mrs. Hartley says the physician cannot come until tomorrow, and I need the willow bark tea from the still room and possibly the lavender oil as well. Lady Wyndham's face had gone the particular shade of purple that preceded her most spectacular displays of temper. "Felicity," she hissed through clenched teeth, "we have a guest." For the first time, Felicity seemed to register the presence of the tall, dark stranger by the fireplace. She blinked, taking in his immaculate attire, his cold gray eyes, and his expression of faint distaste as he surveyed her appearance. "So we do," she said, entirely without apology. She turned back to her mother. "The willow bark, Mama. The children are suffering." "The children can wait," Lady Wyndham said, her voice strained to breaking. "Lord Kingsley, please forgive my youngest daughter. She has been assisting at the Foundling Hospital and has clearly forgotten all sense of propriety." The Earl's gray eyes moved over Felicity with clinical detachment, as if she were a curiosity in a museum rather than a woman standing before him. "I see," he said, his voice as cold as his expression. "The charitable daughter." Something in his tone made Felicity's spine stiffen. She had heard that particular inflection before, the subtle condescension of the wealthy toward those who concerned themselves with the unfortunate. It rankled her every time. "Yes," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "And you are the Earl who has come to inspect my sisters like horses at market, I presume." The silence that followed was so complete that Felicity could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Penelope, the eldest and most beautiful of the Wyndham sisters, let out a small gasp. Beatrice, delicate and prone to vapors, pressed her handkerchief to her lips. Margaret, the practical one, simply closed her eyes in resignation. Lady Wyndham looked as though she might faint. The Earl of Kingsley, however, did something entirely unexpected. His gray eyes sharpened with interest, the first sign of genuine animation Felicity had witnessed since entering the room. "Your mother's letter indicated 3 eligible daughters," he said slowly. "It seems she underestimated the count." "I am not available," Felicity said firmly. "I have no intention of marrying anyone, least of all a man who treats my sisters as interchangeable commodities." "Felicity," Lady Wyndham's voice cracked like a whip, "you will apologize to his lordship immediately." "I will not." Felicity crossed her arms over her mud-stained bodice. "He came here to offer marriage to any daughter who would have him, did he not? Any daughter. As if it matters not at all which one. As if we are merely vessels for his heir rather than women with hearts and minds and preferences of our own." The Earl's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in the depths of those gray eyes. "You are remarkably well informed about the purpose of my visit. Servants talk, and my sisters write letters when they are anxious." Felicity gestured toward the settee where Penelope, Beatrice, and Margaret sat frozen in various states of mortification. "Look at them, 3 accomplished, beautiful women reduced to merchandise because a wealthy man has decided he requires a wife and cares not which one he receives." "Felicity, that is quite enough," Lady Wyndham said, rising from her chair with trembling dignity. "You will leave this room immediately and not return until you have remembered your manners." But Lord Kingsley raised one elegant hand. "No," he said quietly. "Let her speak. It has been some time since anyone has addressed me with such refreshing honesty." Felicity stared at him, momentarily thrown off balance by his response. She had expected cold fury, immediate dismissal, perhaps even a cutting remark about her appearance or her station. She had not expected this quiet invitation to continue. "Very well," she said, recovering herself. "You want honesty? Here it is. I have watched my sister Eugenia enter into a marriage of convenience with Lord Barrington. I have watched her disappear behind closed doors, watched the light fade from her eyes, watched her learn to hold herself carefully so that the bruises do not show beneath her sleeves." Lady Wyndham made a strangled sound of protest, but Felicity pressed on, her voice gaining strength. "Marriage in our world is a cage, my lord, for women at least. We are given to men who may use us, abuse us, and discard us as they see fit, and society calls this arrangement sacred. You speak of requiring a wife and an heir as if these are simple business transactions. But for whichever of my sisters agrees to your terms, it will be her entire life signed away. Her body, her freedom, her future children. All of it, given to a man who admits openly that he cares not which woman he takes, only that she fulfill her function." The drawing room had gone very still. Even Lady Wyndham had ceased her protestations, staring at her youngest daughter as if seeing her for the first time. Lord Kingsley remained by the fireplace, his gray eyes fixed on Felicity's face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured. "You make compelling arguments, Miss Wyndham, but you speak as though I created these cruel customs rather than merely observing them." "To accept the benefit of a cruel custom is to condone it," Felicity shot back. "You have wealth, title, power. You could choose differently. You could seek a companion rather than a possession, an equal rather than a commodity. Instead, you come to our drawing room and announce that any daughter will do, as if we are nothing more than breeding stock. Felicity, you have said quite enough." Lady Wyndham's voice had gone deadly quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded the most severe punishments. "Lord Kingsley, I must beg your forgiveness for my daughter's unforgivable behavior. She has clearly been spending too much time among the lower orders and has forgotten her place entirely." The Earl was silent for a long moment, his gaze still fixed on Felicity. Something passed across his features, too quick to identify, and then the mask of cold indifference settled back into place. "I believe I have taken enough of your time, Lady Wyndham," he said, his voice returning to its previous flatness. "I shall take my leave." "My lord, please," Lady Wyndham said, desperation creeping into her tone. "My daughters, my other daughters, they are accomplished and beautiful, and would make any man a fine wife. Penelope plays the pianoforte beautifully, and Beatrice has the most delicate watercolors, and Margaret manages a household with remarkable efficiency. I am certain they are all admirable young women." The Earl inclined his head briefly. "Good afternoon, Lady Wyndham." "Ladies." He strode toward the door, passing close enough to Felicity that she caught the scent of sandalwood and something darker, something that reminded her of winter storms. At the threshold, he paused and turned back. "Miss Felicity," he said, and there was something strange in his voice, something that might almost have been respect. "Your willow bark tea, for the children." And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any slam. The slap came without warning. Felicity's head snapped to the side, her cheek burning from the impact of her mother's palm. She looked back to see Lady Wyndham staring at her own hand, a flicker of shock crossing her face, her fingers trembling slightly before the anger rushed back to fill the void. "You have ruined us," Lady Wyndham said, her voice shaking with fury. "You selfish, thoughtless, impossible girl. You have ruined every chance your sisters had at a respectable match. The Earl of Kingsley, one of the wealthiest men in England, and you drove him away with your vulgar, common opinions." "Perhaps I did them a favor," Felicity said quietly, pressing her hand to her stinging cheek. "Would you truly have given any of them to a man who cared not which one he received?" "I would have given all of them, if it meant securing their futures." Lady Wyndham's composure shattered entirely. "You know nothing of the real world, Felicity. Nothing of what it means to be poor, to be desperate, to watch your daughters wither on the vine because there is no money for gowns or seasons or dowries. The Earl offered security, wealth, a future. And you threw it away because of your ridiculous romantic notions." Felicity thought of Eugenia, beautiful Eugenia, who had married Lord Barrington 2 years ago in a ceremony that had seemed like a fairy tale. She thought of the letters that had grown shorter and more stilted over time, the visits where Eugenia moved carefully and spoke in monosyllables, the bruises glimpsed beneath sleeve and collar. "There are worse things than poverty, Mama," she said. Lady Wyndham turned away, her shoulders shaking. "Go," she said. "Go to your precious orphans. It is all you are good for anyway." Felicity went. The Foundling Hospital was a sprawling complex of buildings on the outskirts of Bloomsbury, a world away from the glittering ballrooms and elegant townhouses that comprised most of fashionable London. Felicity had been volunteering there 4 days a week for nearly 2 years, teaching the older children to read and write, helping the younger ones learn practical skills that might serve them when they were turned out into the world. She arrived just as the sun was beginning to set, the willow bark tea and lavender oil clutched in her basket. Mrs. Hartley, the formidable matron who ran the hospital, met her at the door with a look of profound relief. "Thank heavens you have come, Miss Wyndham. The 3 little ones are asking for you specifically." Felicity took a brief moment to wash the mud from her hands and face at the basin in the scullery, though nothing could be done for her ruined dress. The next several hours passed in a blur of activity. She brewed tea and applied cool cloths to fevered foreheads. She told stories to distract frightened children from their discomfort. She held the hand of little Tommy Graves, who at 7 years old had already survived more hardship than most adults, and promised him that he would feel better by morning. It was well past midnight when she finally sat down in the small office Mrs. Hartley kept at the back of the hospital. Her muscles ached, her eyes burned with exhaustion, and her dress, already ruined from the morning's adventures, was now spotted with additional stains. But the children were sleeping peacefully, their fevers beginning to break, and that was all that mattered. "You look like you have been through a war," Mrs. Hartley observed, setting a cup of tea in front of Felicity. "I have." Felicity wrapped her hands around the warm cup and sighed. "I may have destroyed my family's social standing entirely this afternoon." "Oh?" Mrs. Hartley raised an eyebrow. "That sounds rather dramatic, even for you." Felicity told her about the Earl of Kingsley, about his cold proposition and her fiery response, about the slap and her mother's accusations, about the way those gray eyes had watched her with something that looked almost like interest. Mrs. Hartley listened in silence, her expression thoughtful. When Felicity finished, she said, "You spoke the truth. That is rarely a popular choice, but it is always the right one. My mother would disagree." "Your mother is frightened." Mrs. Hartley's voice gentled. "Fear makes people behave in ways they later regret. She sees her daughter's future slipping away and cannot understand why you would throw away what looked like an opportunity." "An opportunity to be purchased like furniture," Felicity said bitterly. "Perhaps, but you might also consider that not all men who make cold propositions have cold hearts." Mrs. Hartley took a sip of her own tea. "Sometimes the ones who seem the most frozen are simply the ones who have been most badly burned." Felicity thought about this as she made her way home through the quiet streets, escorted by one of the hospital's footmen. She thought about the Earl's gray eyes and the strange flicker she had seen in them when she challenged him. She thought about the way he had paused at the door, mentioned the willow bark tea for the children. A man who truly cared nothing for others would not have noticed such a detail, would not have thought to mention it. But it did not matter. The Earl was gone, probably never to return, and Felicity had more pressing concerns than analyzing the inner workings of a cold aristocrat's heart. She reached home just as dawn was breaking over the rooftops of London. The household was still asleep, and she crept up to her room without encountering anyone. She fell into bed, still wearing her ruined dress, and was asleep within moments. It was the sound of screaming that woke her. Felicity bolted upright, disoriented and alarmed. Sunlight streamed through her windows, suggesting she had slept far longer than intended, but the screaming continued from somewhere below. She threw on a wrapper and rushed downstairs to find the household in complete chaos. Her mother stood in the entrance hall, a letter clutched in her trembling hands, her face the color of fresh cream. Penelope, Beatrice, and Margaret clustered around her, all talking at once in voices high with agitation. Several servants hovered nearby, clearly torn between propriety and curiosity. "What has happened?" Felicity demanded, pushing her way through the group. "Mama, are you unwell?" Lady Wyndham turned to look at her, and her expression was so strange that Felicity felt a chill run down her spine. It was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something that might almost have been hope. "He has written," Lady Wyndham said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Earl of Kingsley. He has written to say that he has changed his mind." Felicity's heart stuttered. Changed his mind about what? Lady Wyndham held out the letter with shaking hands. "About which daughter he will marry." Felicity took the paper and read the elegant, precise handwriting that covered the page. "Lady Wyndham, after considerable reflection upon our meeting yesterday, I find that I must revise my earlier position. I stated that any of your daughters would serve my purposes equally well. This was, as your youngest daughter so eloquently pointed out, an approach that treated the young women in question as commodities rather than individuals. I have therefore decided to be more specific in my requirements. I wish to marry Miss Felicity Wyndham. Only Miss Felicity Wyndham. She is the first person in many years who has spoken to me as a human being rather than a title. She challenged my assumptions, questioned my motives, and demonstrated a strength of character that I confess I had begun to believe no longer existed in the world. I am under no illusions that she will accept me easily. Indeed, based upon her opinions expressed yesterday, I suspect she will refuse me entirely. But I find that I cannot proceed with a cold transaction when I have glimpsed the possibility of something more. I offer Miss Felicity a true union of minds. Honesty, respect, and the freedom to continue her charitable work. I will not require her to perform happiness she does not feel or pretend to sentiments that do not exist. I ask only for the opportunity to prove that I am not the monster she believes me to be. I await her response. Tristan Sterling, Earl of Kingsley Felicity, read the letter 3 times before she could convince herself it was real. Around her, her family had fallen into stunned silence, all eyes fixed upon her face. "This is absurd," she finally said. "He cannot possibly mean this." "He means it." Margaret, ever practical, had recovered her composure first. Lord Kingsley is known for many things, but frivolity is not among them. If he has written this letter, he means every word. But he does not know me. He met me once, covered in mud, while I berated him for treating my sisters like livestock. What possible reason could he have for wanting to marry me specifically? You told him the truth. Penelope's voice was quiet, thoughtful. Perhaps that is reason enough. Felicity looked at her eldest sister, struck by the sadness in her eyes. Penelope, who was beautiful and accomplished and had been trained since birth to become some nobleman's perfect wife. Penelope, who had sat on that settee yesterday, prepared to be selected like a prize from a shelf. "I am sorry, Penelope. You deserved better than what I gave you yesterday." "No." Penelope shook her head. "You were right, about all of it. I have been so desperate to escape this house, to find security and stability, that I forgot to ask whether the price was worth paying. Lord Kingsley may be wealthy, but he is also cold and distant and treats marriage as a business arrangement. I do not want that. I never wanted that. I simply could not see any other option." "Well," Lady Wyndham said, her voice regaining some of its usual sharpness, "it seems there is an option now. Felicity will accept the Earl's proposal, and our family will be saved." Felicity turned to stare at her mother. "I will do nothing of the sort. You will do as you are told for once in your life." Lady Wyndham's eyes blazed. "You created this situation with your vulgar outburst. You will repair it by accepting his offer." "His offer to marry me because I insulted him? That makes no sense, Mama. There must be some ulterior motive, some scheme I cannot see." "What possible scheme could he have?" Margaret asked reasonably. "He is one of the wealthiest men in England. He has no need of our modest fortune or our fading social connections. If he wished to marry for advantage, he would seek a duke's daughter, not a viscount's impoverished youngest." It was a fair point, and Felicity found herself momentarily at a loss for an argument. "Write to him," Beatrice suggested, her delicate features arranged in an expression of unusual determination. "Tell him no. See what he does. If he accepts your refusal gracefully, then we will know his offer was not entirely sincere. But if he persists, perhaps there is something genuine in his intentions." It was, Felicity had to admit, a reasonable plan. She retired to her room and composed a letter of refusal. She was polite but firm, explaining that while she appreciated his unexpected interest, she had no intention of marrying anyone, and therefore could not accept his proposal. She thanked him for his kind words about her character and wished him well in his search for a suitable bride. She sent the letter that afternoon and tried to return to her normal life. 2 days later, another letter arrived. "Miss Wyndham, I do not accept your refusal. I shall call upon you at 3 o'clock this afternoon to discuss the matter further." Kingsley Felicity stared at the brief message, torn between outrage and something that felt dangerously like amusement. The sheer arrogance of the man, to declare that he did not accept her refusal as if she had no say in the matter. And yet, there was something about his persistence that stirred her curiosity, despite herself. He arrived at precisely 3 o'clock, and this time Felicity was ready for him. She had dressed in her best afternoon gown, a simple muslin frock in pale green that brought out the color of her eyes. She had attempted to tame her red curls into something resembling respectability, though several strands had already escaped to frame her face. She received him alone in the drawing room, having convinced her mother and sisters to give her privacy. Whatever happened in this conversation, she did not want witnesses. "You said you do not accept my refusal. she said without preamble as he entered the room. "That is not how refusals work, my lord." The Earl looked different today, less cold somehow, though his expression remained carefully controlled. He wore a dark blue coat that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, and his gray eyes held a warmth that had been entirely absent during their first meeting. "I have never been particularly good at accepting things that displease me," he said. "It is a character flaw, I am told." "It is presumptuous." "Perhaps." He did not seem troubled by the accusation. "May I sit?" Felicity gestured toward a chair, and he settled into it with the easy grace of a man accustomed to commanding attention. She took a seat opposite him, maintaining what she hoped was a dignified distance. "Before you repeat your refusal," he said, "allow me to explain why I have come. I am listening. Since our meeting 2 days ago, I have made inquiries about you. I have learned that you volunteer at the Foundling Hospital 4 days each week, teaching children to read and write and acquire useful skills. I have learned that you have frightened away 6 suitors before they could ever trouble your mother with a proposal. I have learned that you are known among certain circles for correcting men who express ignorant opinions on matters of philosophy and politics." Felicity felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You have been spying on me." "I have been conducting research. There is a difference." His gray eyes held hers steadily. "What I have learned is that you are exactly the woman I believed you to be when you stood in this room covered in mud and told me I was treating your sisters as livestock." "And you found this attractive?" "I found it remarkable." He leaned forward slightly, his manner losing some of its formality. "Miss Wyndham, I have spent the past decade of my life surrounded by people who tell me only what they believe I wish to hear. I am the Earl of Kingsley, and my title and wealth create a barrier that few are willing to breach. I have forgotten what it feels like to be spoken to honestly." Felicity considered this. She thought about her own experiences in society, the endless performance of politeness and propriety that was expected of young women. She understood, perhaps better than most, the exhaustion of never being permitted to speak one's true thoughts. "That explains why my honesty appealed to you," she said slowly. "It does not explain why you wish to marry me. I am offering you a true companionship." His voice was steady, his gaze unwavering. "Not a cage. You spoke of your sister's marriage and the darkness you have witnessed there. I am not Lord Barrington. I have no desire to control or diminish you. I want an equal, someone who will challenge me and speak truth to me and refuse to pretend happiness she does not feel." You speak very prettily," Felicity said, "but words are easy. How am I to trust that your actions will match your promises?" "You cannot." He acknowledged this with a slight inclination of his head. "Not yet. Trust must be earned, and I have done nothing to earn yours. That is why I am not asking you to marry me today." She blinked. "You are not?" "I am asking you to give me time. Allow me to prove who I am beneath the frost, as you so aptly called it. Allow me to show you that my fears and wounds are similar to your own, and that we might understand each other in ways that transcend the usual expectations of marriage." It was not what she had expected. She had expected pressure, demands, perhaps even threats given the way her mother had been behaving. She had not expected this quiet request for patience. "And if I agree to give you time," she said carefully, "what precisely does that entail?" "I will come to the Foundling Hospital tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. I wish to see where you spend your days, to understand what you care about and who you truly are. After that, we will discuss whether you are willing to continue our acquaintance." Felicity studied his face, searching for signs of deception or ulterior motive. She found only a careful guardedness that she recognized from her own mirror, the mask of someone who had been hurt and learned to protect themselves accordingly. "Why?" she asked. "Why go to such lengths? There are countless women in London who would accept your proposal without question. Why pursue the one who insulted you?" Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the careful facade. Because you were the first person in years to see me as a man rather than a title. And because when you spoke of your sister's suffering, I saw in your eyes a pain that mirrored my own. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that Felicity could not quite decipher. She thought about her sister Eugenia, about the bruises and the silence. She thought about the Earl's cold proposal and the strange vulnerability she glimpsed beneath his composed exterior. "Very well," she said finally. "Come to the Foundling Hospital tomorrow at 10. I will show you my world, Lord Kingsley, and then we shall see." He arrived at precisely 10 o'clock the following morning, dressed far more simply than she had expected. Gone were the elaborate cravats and polished boots of society. He wore practical clothing better suited to activity, and he had left his carriage around the corner to avoid drawing attention. Mrs. Hartley raised her eyebrows when Felicity introduced him, but said nothing beyond a polite greeting. The children, however, had no such restraint. "Who is the tall man?" demanded little Tommy Graves, who had recovered completely from his fever. "Is he a giant? He looks like a giant." "He is a friend," Felicity said, aware of how inadequate the word was to describe whatever complicated thing existed between them. "He has come to learn about our work here." "Can he teach us something?" asked Mary Collins, an 8-year-old with serious dark eyes. "Miss Felicity teaches us reading. What can the giant teach us?" Lord Kingsley looked momentarily nonplussed, and Felicity felt a small flash of satisfaction at seeing him off balance for once. But then something unexpected happened. He crouched down to Mary's level, bringing his gray eyes to meet hers directly. "I know something of mathematics," he said gravely, "and I can tell you stories about ancient Rome, if that would interest you." Mary considered this. "Are there battles in the stories?" "Many battles, and gladiators, and emperors who were sometimes very wise and sometimes very foolish." "I should like to hear about the foolish emperors," Mary decided. "Foolish people are more interesting than wise ones." The Earl's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "On that point, Miss Collins, we are in complete agreement." What followed was one of the strangest mornings of Felicity's life. She watched as the Earl of Kingsley, the Stone Earl, the man known throughout London for his cold demeanor and distant manner, sat on a small wooden chair surrounded by orphaned children and told them stories of Julius Caesar and Marcus Aurelius. He did not speak down to them. He did not simplify or condescend. He spoke to them as if they were intelligent beings capable of understanding complex ideas, and they responded with an engagement that surprised even Felicity. "Why did the emperor do that?" asked a boy called Samuel, frowning at a particularly confusing historical decision. "It seems very stupid." "It does it not?" The Earl nodded seriously. "Sometimes people in power make choices that seem obvious mistakes to those who come after. Often it is because they are afraid or proud or cannot see clearly because of their own pain." Felicity felt the words land somewhere deep in her chest. She thought about her mother's cruelty, born of fear for her daughter's futures. She thought about Lord Barrington's violence, perhaps rooted in his own dark wounds. She thought about the Earl himself, his coldness a shield against old griefs. Later, when the children had been sent to their lessons and Mrs. Hartley had tactfully withdrawn, Felicity and Lord Kingsley walked through the hospital's small garden. The roses were in bloom, their fragrance mixing with the city's less pleasant smells to create something unexpectedly lovely. She had watched him throughout the morning with a growing sense of bewilderment. This was not the cold, distant Earl who had stood in her mother's drawing room and announced that any daughter would do. This was a man who listened to children's stories with genuine interest, who asked questions that showed he was truly paying attention, who treated the smallest orphan with the same respect he would show a duke. "You are staring at me," he observed without turning his head. "I am trying to reconcile the man I saw this morning with the man who made that terrible proposal to my family. Perhaps they are the same man." He paused beside a climbing rose heavy with pink blooms. Perhaps one has simply been hiding inside the other for a very long time. What made you hide? He was silent for so long that Felicity thought he would not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its careful control, revealing something raw and painful beneath. "You surprised me today," Felicity admitted. "I did not expect you to engage with the children so genuinely." "I surprised myself." He was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes fixed on a climbing rose that had nearly overtaken the garden wall. "There was a time many years ago when I was not so cold as I have become, when I believed in connection and warmth and the possibility of happiness." "What changed?" He did not answer immediately. When he did speak, his voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the pain beneath the words. "I had a younger brother, Thomas. He was the bright one, the warm one, the one everyone loved. I adored him beyond reason. When I was 23, he fell ill with a fever that swept through our country estate. He was 14 years old. I sat with him for 3 days and nights, holding his hand, promising him that he would recover. He died on the 4th morning, while I was sleeping in the chair beside his bed." Felicity's throat tightened. She had not expected this, had not been prepared for the raw vulnerability in his confession. "I am sorry," she said softly. "That is a terrible loss." "It was only the beginning." His jaw tightened. "My mother never recovered from Thomas's death. She had always been fragile, prone to dark moods and fits of jealousy, but after we buried him, she lost herself entirely. She began to believe that my father was responsible, that he had brought the fever into the house through some negligence. She accused him of killing her son. But that was not true. The fever came from the village. A child had died there the week before. There was nothing my father could have done to prevent it." He paused, gathering himself. But my mother would not accept this. She became consumed by her grief and her rage. She and my father, who had once loved each other deeply, began to tear each other apart. Every day brought new accusations, new cruelties, new attempts to wound. He stopped walking, his hands clasped behind his back, his face turned away from her. One morning, when I was 26, my father found my mother in the library. She had taken her own life. The note she left blamed him entirely. He survived her by 8 months before drinking himself to death. The silence that followed was heavy with sorrow. Felicity did not know what to say, what words could possibly address such tragedy. She reached out impulsively and laid her hand on his arm. He looked down at her touch as if it were something foreign, something he had not experienced in a very long time. When he raised his eyes to hers, they were bright with unshed tears. "I swore after that night that I would never love anyone again, that I would never allow passion or attachment to grow in my heart, because I had seen what it could destroy. I built walls around myself, became the cold, distant earl that society expected. And for 10 years, I believed I had succeeded. But you have not," Felicity said quietly. "Have you?" "I thought I had." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Until a young woman walked into a drawing room covered in mud and told me I was a fool and a monster. Until she looked at me with those fierce green eyes and reminded me that I was a human being, not just a title. Until she made me feel something other than emptiness for the first time in a decade." Felicity's heart was pounding. She should pull away, should retreat to the safety of distance and propriety. She had sworn never to marry, never to place herself in another's power. And yet, standing here in this modest garden with the scent of roses around them, she found herself unable to move. "I cannot promise you that I will not be difficult," she said finally. "I cannot promise that I will be gentle or biddable or any of the things a wife is supposed to be." "I do not want gentle or biddable." His gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I want someone who will challenge me, who will speak truth to me even when it is uncomfortable. I want a partner who will help me remember what it feels like to be alive." "And if I hurt you?" If this thing between us becomes the same destruction that claimed your parents, then at least I will have felt something. He reached up, slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek with gentle fingers. I would rather risk pain with you than continue in this frozen existence alone. It was not a proposal, not yet, but it was a beginning. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Felicity had ever experienced. Lord Kingsley, whom she had begun to call Tristan in the privacy of her own thoughts, became a regular presence at the Foundling Hospital. He learned the names of every child, remembered their preferences and their fears. He sat with little Tommy Graves when the boy had nightmares, telling him stories until he fell back asleep. When a fever swept through the hospital again, and one of the youngest children, a girl called Rose, fell critically ill, Tristan was there through the long nights. He held the child in his arms as her small body fought for life, and when she slipped away just before dawn, Felicity watched tears fall silently down his cheeks. He helped carry the tiny coffin to the burial ground. And afterward, he held Felicity while she wept for the life lost too soon. "Why do you come here?" she asked him one afternoon, as they sat in the garden where they had first truly spoken. "You do not have to. You have done enough to prove your sincerity." "I do not come here to prove anything." His gray eyes were soft as he looked at her. "I come because these children have taught me something I had forgotten. That vulnerability is not weakness. That opening oneself to pain is the price of opening oneself to joy." "I taught you that?" "You reminded me of what I already knew and chose to forget." He took her hand in his, threading their fingers together. "You walked into my life late and disheveled and covered in mud, and you knocked down every wall I had spent a decade building. You are magnificent and impossible, and exactly what I needed. Flattery will not make me more amenable to your proposal," she said, but she was smiling. "Then perhaps this will." He leaned forward and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing intensity. Felicity had been kissed before, stolen moments with suitors she had no intention of accepting. But this was different. This felt like coming home. When they finally drew apart, both breathing unsteadily, his gray eyes searched hers with an expression of such hope that it made her heart ache. "Marry me," he said, "not because society expects it, or because your mother demands it, or because I am wealthy and titled and can provide for you. Marry me because you feel this thing between us. Marry me because you believe, as I do, that we could build something real together." She wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being wanted to say yes. But fear still held her back. The memory of Eugenia's bruises and her mother's warnings about what marriage truly meant for women. "I need more time," she whispered. "Not because I do not want you, but because I am afraid." "Then take what time you need." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I have waited 10 years to feel anything at all. I can wait a while longer for you." They returned to London society together, and the whispers began immediately. The Earl of Kingsley, attentive to the plain, red-haired Wyndham girl. The Earl of Kingsley, escorting her to assemblies and balls and dinners, dancing with her far more than the 2 dances propriety allowed. The Earl of Kingsley, smiling in public for the first time anyone could remember. The gossip was relentless. Some said she had bewitched him with strange arts learned at the Foundling Hospital. Some said it was a temporary madness that would pass when he came to his senses. Some said she must be with child, and he was doing the honorable thing. Felicity heard it all, the whispers behind fans and the pointed comments just loud enough to reach her ears. She held her head high and pretended not to notice, but the poison seeped in despite her best efforts. "Have you noticed?" one matron said to another at a ball, standing close enough to Felicity that every word was audible. "Such a waste of a man on that charity case. He will tire of her soon enough and seek more appropriate companionship. It is always the way with these things. Poor plain thing. She must know it cannot last. Felicity felt the words land like blows, awakening every insecurity she had ever possessed. She thought of her mother's warnings about men and their inconstancy. She thought of Tristan's first proposal, cold and transactional, and wondered if this warmth was merely performance. That night, when he came to her in the moonlit conservatory where they had stolen a moment alone, she could not meet his eyes. "What has happened?" He tilted her chin up gently, concern etched across his features. "Something is troubling you." She told him about the whispers, about the matron's predictions, about the fear that had been growing in her heart since they returned to society. When she finished, his expression had gone dark with fury. "Who said these things to you?" "It does not matter." "It matters to me." His jaw was tight. "These venomous gossips attacking you simply because you dared to capture my attention when they could not. I will not permit it. You cannot control what people say, Tristan." "Perhaps not, but I can make my position clear." He took both her hands in his. "I wish to announce our engagement publicly. I wish to host a ball in your honor, to introduce you to society as my chosen partner. And I wish to make it absolutely clear to everyone present that any disrespect toward you is a personal insult to me." Felicity's heart raced. Part of her thrilled at his fierce protection, but part of her still cowered from the attention such a gesture would bring. "I do not know if I am ready for that." "Then tell me what you need. Tell me how to prove to you that this is real, that I am not going to tire of you or seek more appropriate companionship or any of the other poisonous predictions these bitter women have made." His gray eyes burned with intensity. "I love you, Felicity. I did not think myself capable of saying those words ever again, but I love you, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it, if that is what it takes." It was the first time he had said the words. Felicity felt them settle into her heart like seeds taking root, and she knew with sudden certainty that she loved him too. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, announce it to the world. Yes, let them see that you chose me, the muddy one, the impossible one, the one who told you exactly what she thought." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Felicity felt the last of her reservations crumble away. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and growing certainty. Felicity found herself changing in ways she had not anticipated. The sharp edges of her defensiveness began to soften, not because Tristan demanded it, but because she no longer felt the need to protect herself so fiercely. He continued to surprise her. When she mentioned offhandedly that she had never learned to ride properly, he arranged for a gentle mare to be brought to Hyde Park at dawn, before the fashionable crowds arrived to judge and whisper. He taught her himself, patient and encouraging, celebrating each small victory as if she had conquered an empire. When she confessed her fear that his friends would look down upon her, he introduced her to a select circle of people who valued substance over status. Lady Henrietta Cavendish, a widow with sharp wit and sharper intelligence, became an unexpected friend. Sir Marcus Ashton, a philosopher and reformer who had once been Tristan's tutor, treated Felicity as an intellectual equal and engaged her in debates that lasted for hours. "You have surrounded yourself with unusual people," she observed one evening after a particularly stimulating dinner party. "I have surrounded myself with interesting people." Tristan smiled at her across the open carriage as they drove through Hyde Park, a setting public enough to silence any question of impropriety. "Society may worship beauty and bloodlines, but I have always found courage and conviction far more attractive." "Is that why you chose me?" "I chose you because you walked into a room covered in mud and told me I was a fool." His gray eyes softened. "And because even then, even when you despised everything you thought I represented, you cared more about sick children than about impressing an earl. That told me everything I needed to know about your character." The ball was a spectacle that London society would discuss for years afterward. The Earl of Kingsley had transformed his townhouse into a wonderland of light and flowers, and the invitations had been the most sought after of the season. Everyone who was anyone attended, eager to see this unprecedented event for themselves. Felicity wore a gown of deep emerald silk that made her eyes shine like jewels. Her red hair was swept up in an elegant arrangement, and around her throat hung a simple strand of pearls that had belonged to Tristan's mother. "You look beautiful," he murmured, as he led her down the grand staircase to where their guests waited. The most beautiful woman in any room. Flatterer. Truth-teller. He squeezed her hand. "Are you ready?" "No, but let us do it anyway." The toast he made silenced every whisper in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tristan said, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom, "I wish to introduce to you Miss Felicity Wyndham, my chosen partner in all things. Some of you may have wondered at my interest in this remarkable woman. Some of you may have speculated about her worthiness to stand at my side." He paused, letting the tension build, and Felicity felt the eyes of hundreds of guests upon her. "Let me make my position absolutely clear. Miss Wyndham challenged me from the moment we met. She spoke truth to me when everyone else offered only flattery. She reminded me that I was a human being, not merely a title. She is the most courageous, principled, and admirable woman I have ever known, and I count myself extraordinarily fortunate that she has agreed to become my wife." The murmurs that swept through the room were a mixture of shock, approval, and in some corners, bitter jealousy. "Anyone who disrespects her," Tristan continued, his gray eyes sweeping the crowd with the cold authority of his title, "disrespects me personally. I trust I have made myself understood." The silence that followed was answer enough. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and dancing. Felicity met more lords and ladies than she could possibly remember, and through it all, Tristan remained at her side, a constant and reassuring presence. But the victory was not without its challengers. Lady Victoria Halstead, a young beauty who had been considered the front-runner for the Earl's hand before Felicity's unexpected appearance, approached them as the evening was winding down. She was tall and elegant, with golden hair and blue eyes that sparkled with malicious intent. "Lord Kingsley," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What a charming party, and what a surprising choice of guest of honor. I must confess, we had all expected you to select a wife of rather more distinguished background." The room seemed to hold its breath. Felicity felt her cheeks flush with anger, but before she could respond, Tristan spoke. "Lady Victoria." His tone was polite, but carried an edge of steel. "I appreciate your attendance this evening, though I confess I am uncertain why you have chosen to comment upon my personal decisions." "I merely express the sentiments of many present," Lady Victoria said, her smile sharpening. "Your Miss Wyndham may have captured your attention temporarily, but surely you cannot intend to actually marry a woman of such unremarkable appearance and dubious social standing." "Ah." Tristan's gray eyes had gone very cold. "I see. You believe that beauty and social standing are the only qualities that matter in a wife. They are certainly the qualities that have mattered to every gentleman of your rank throughout history. Then perhaps it is time for history to change." Tristan's voice remained even, but his words carried to every corner of the suddenly silent room. "Gentlemen of refinement, Lady Victoria, value substance over superficial beauty. They appreciate attractiveness that includes depth of character, strength of principle, and the courage to speak truth even when it is uncomfortable. Beauty without such depth is, I confess, rather tedious." Lady Victoria's perfect complexion had gone very red. "Moreover," Tristan continued, "I find myself quite unable to comprehend why a woman would believe that her only value lies in her youth and her appearance. Such qualities fade, Lady Victoria. Character deepens. I pity any woman who has been raised to believe otherwise." The silence stretched for a long moment, and then, remarkably, someone began to applaud. Others joined in, and Lady Victoria, her face a mask of humiliated fury, retreated into the crowd. Later that night, when the guests had gone and they stood together in the moonlit garden, Felicity turned to Tristan with wonder in her eyes. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with fierce protectiveness. "I will always defend you, Felicity, against gossips and rivals and anyone else who dares to diminish your worth. You are extraordinary, and I will spend the rest of my life making certain you never forget it." She kissed him then, pouring all of her love and gratitude into the embrace. But the enemies had not yet finished their work. Felicity received a letter the following week from her sister Eugenia, the first correspondence in months. It was brief and troubling, expressing concern about the rumors circulating through society and warning her that Lord Barrington had been making pointed comments about the Wyndham family's unsuitability for the Earl's attention. "I fear he means mischief," Eugenia wrote. "Robert has connections among the gossip mongers, and he has never forgiven you for refusing to flatter him at our wedding breakfast. Be careful, sister. He is not a man who forgets slights." Felicity showed the letter to Tristan, and his expression darkened. "Lord Barrington," he said slowly, "I have heard things about him, unpleasant things. He is the source of my sister's suffering." Felicity's voice was tight with old anger. "I have seen the bruises, Tristan. I know what he does to her behind closed doors. Then we shall deal with him." Tristan's gray eyes held a cold determination that reminded her of the stone earl he had once been. "I have solicitors who are very skilled at uncovering information that men would prefer to remain hidden. If Lord Barrington thinks he can harm you through gossip, he will learn that such attacks come with consequences." The investigation uncovered more than they had expected. Lord Barrington's financial affairs were in shambles, his estates mortgaged to the hilt to cover gambling debts and poor investments. He had been hoping to leverage his wife's family reputation to secure new lines of credit, and Felicity's refusal to participate in his schemes had earned her his enmity. The rumors he was spreading about her were meant to destroy her engagement, forcing the Wyndham family back into vulnerability where he could manipulate them. More damning were the documents that proved his abuse of Eugenia. Letters from servants who had witnessed the violence. Medical records from physicians who had treated her injuries. Enough evidence to force a private separation agreement, something almost unheard of but not impossible for a woman with powerful allies. "Your sister can be free of him," Tristan told Felicity as they reviewed the documents together. "If she wishes it. I have the power and the resources to make it happen." "She wishes it." Felicity's voice shook with emotion. "She has wished it for 2 years, but she saw no way out." "Then we shall provide one." The weeks that followed were tense and difficult. Barrington, sensing that his position was weakening, increased his attacks. He spread rumors that Felicity had trapped the Earl through witchcraft or blackmail. He suggested publicly that the Wyndham family was riddled with madness and moral deficiency. Each new attack hardened Tristan's resolve. He met with his solicitors daily, building the case that would destroy Barrington's social standing and credit. He used his influence to ensure that the most damaging rumors were countered before they could spread too far. And every evening, he came to Felicity and held her while she worried about her sister's safety. "What if he hurts her more severely before we can act?" Felicity asked one night, pacing the length of his library while he watched from his chair by the fire. "I have arranged for her to stay with your aunt in Bath for the next fortnight. Barrington believes she has gone for her health. By the time she returns, we will have everything in place." "You thought of everything." "I thought of you." He rose and caught her hands, stilling her restless movement. "I thought of the pain in your eyes every time you speak of your sister. I thought of the young woman who stood in a drawing room and challenged me because she could not bear to see her sisters treated as commodities. That woman deserves to see justice done for the sister she loves." Felicity looked up at him. This man who had once seemed so cold and was now the warmest presence in her life. "I do not deserve you." On the contrary, he lifted her hands to his lips. I suspect we deserve each other perfectly. Two impossible people who found each other against all odds. The confrontation with Lord Barrington happened at a dinner party 2 weeks before the wedding. Tristan had arranged for them to be seated near each other, and when the opportunity arose, he struck. "Lord Barrington," he said, his voice carrying just far enough to be heard by several influential guests. "I understand you have been circulating certain rumors about my fiancée and her family." Barrington's face went pale, then red with anger. "I am sure I do not know what you mean." "Allow me to refresh your memory." Tristan produced a folded paper from his pocket. "I have here a list of establishments where you have been overheard making disparaging comments about the Wyndham family. Shall I read them aloud, or would you prefer a more private discussion?" "This is outrageous," Barrington sputtered. "I shall not sit here and be accused of." "Additionally," Tristan continued, as if Barrington had not spoken, "I have received some very interesting documents regarding your treatment of Lady Barrington. Documents that I am prepared to share with the appropriate authorities unless certain conditions are met." The blood drained from Barrington's face entirely. "You cannot," he whispered. "The scandal would destroy." "The scandal would destroy you, Lord Barrington. Not your wife, who is the victim of your cruelty, but you." Tristan's gray eyes were cold as winter ice. "I suggest we retire to the library to discuss terms." When they emerged an hour later, it was with an agreement that would change Eugenia's life forever. Lord Barrington would consent to a private separation. He would guarantee a generous annual allowance to support Eugenia in a separate household. He would make no further contact with any member of the Wyndham family. And in exchange, the documents detailing his abuse would remain private. "He leaves for the continent next week," Tristan told Felicity later that night. "I have strongly encouraged him not to return." Felicity threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. "You saved her. You saved my sister. You saved her." He held her close, his voice rough with emotion. "You spoke the truth about what she was suffering. You refused to look away. I merely provided the means to act." "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "I love you more than I knew was possible." "Then marry me." He pulled back to look into her eyes. "Tomorrow, next week, whenever you wish. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life being worthy of you." "Tomorrow is too soon," she laughed through her tears. "But next week is not." The wedding was held in a small chapel in the countryside, far from the gossips and spectacles of London society. Only family and close friends attended, and Mrs. Hartley from the Foundling Hospital, and a handful of the older children who had become dear to them both. The morning dawned clear and bright, the sort of perfect summer day that seemed designed specifically for beginnings. Felicity woke early in the guest chamber of Lady Henrietta's country house, where she had spent the night before her wedding, and lay for a long moment, simply breathing and thinking. In a few hours, she would become the Countess of Kingsley. The impossible girl who had sworn never to marry would bind herself to a man she had once called a fool and a monster. The change was so profound that she almost could not comprehend it. A knock at the door announced her sister Eugenia, who had returned from Bath looking healthier and happier than Felicity had seen her in years. The bruises were fading, but more importantly, the light had returned to her eyes. "Are you having doubts?" Eugenia asked, settling onto the bed beside her. "Not doubts, precisely. More like astonishment that this is actually happening." "I know what you mean." Eugenia took her hand. "I never thought I would see you willingly marry anyone. You were always so determined to remain free." "I thought freedom meant being alone." Felicity squeezed her sister's fingers. "I was wrong. True freedom is being with someone who loves you exactly as you are, who does not try to change you or control you. Tristan gives me that." "He saved me," Eugenia said softly. "I know you were the one who discovered what Robert was doing and refused to look away. But Tristan gave you the power to act. He used his influence to free me from a marriage I thought would kill me. He is a good man, Felicity smiled. Underneath all that frost and formality, he is one of the best men I have ever known. Then marry him. Eugenia kissed her cheek. And be happy. God knows one of us deserves to be. Felicity wore a simple white gown trimmed with lace, and her red hair was threaded with flowers from the chapel garden. She carried a bouquet of lavender and roses, and as she walked toward Tristan, she felt none of the fear that had haunted her for so long. He stood at the altar, tall and dark, and no longer cold at all. His gray eyes were bright with emotion as he watched her approach, and when she reached him, he took her hands in his with a tenderness that made her heart overflow. "You came late," he murmured, "as always." "But I came," she whispered back, "as always." The vows they exchanged were simple but profound. They promised to be honest with each other, to speak truth even when it was uncomfortable. They promised to face challenges together, to support each other through darkness and light. They promised to love not with the destructive passion that had claimed Tristan's parents, but with the steady, growing devotion that came from truly knowing another person. When they kissed to seal their union, Felicity felt something she had never expected to feel. She felt safe. She felt home. But even in happiness, challenges arose. The first year of their marriage was not without its difficulties. Tristan, who had spent a decade behind walls of ice, sometimes retreated into old patterns when conflict arose. Felicity, who had sworn never to surrender her independence, sometimes tested his devotion by pushing him away. They learned to recognize these patterns and to work through them together. When Tristan grew cold and distant, Felicity reminded him that vulnerability was not weakness, that she could be trusted with his pain. When Felicity tried to run, Tristan followed her, steady and patient, reminding her that he had chosen her and would continue choosing her every day. They developed rituals that sustained them through the difficult times. Every evening, no matter how busy their days had been, they walked together in the gardens after dinner. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their fears and hopes and small daily triumphs. These walks became sacred to them, a time when the rest of the world fell away and they were simply two people who loved each other. When their first child was born, a daughter they named Charlotte after Tristan's grandmother, Felicity watched her husband hold the tiny bundle in his arms and wept. She had seen him weep before, in moments of grief or overwhelming emotion, but these were different tears. These were tears of joy so profound that it transformed his face entirely. "She has your hair," he whispered, touching the downy red fuzz on Charlotte's head. "And your eyes," Felicity replied, "gray as storm clouds, gray as her impossible father." He looked up at her, his expression filled with wonder. "We made this perfect, beautiful thing." "We did." She reached out to touch his cheek. "And we will make more. A whole family of impossible people with red hair and gray eyes and opinions far too strong for polite society." He laughed, and the sound was so warm and free that it made her heart ache with happiness. This was not the stone earl who had first walked into her mother's drawing room. This was Tristan, her partner and her equal, and the love of her life. The twins came 2 years later, followed by 2 more years of sleepless nights and joyful chaos. "We are both damaged," Felicity said one night, curled against him in the firelit darkness of their bedroom. "We bring our wounds into this marriage." "We do." His fingers traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. "But perhaps that is not such a terrible thing. Perhaps the wounded can understand each other in ways the whole cannot." An optimistic view from the Stone Earl. "The Stone Earl is dead." He kissed the top of her head. "You killed him with your mud-covered arrival and your impossible opinions. In his place is merely a man who loves you beyond reason. A man who does not accept refusals. Never." He smiled against her hair. "It would have been the greatest mistake of my life to accept your refusal. I knew it even then." "How?" Because you were the first person in years who made me feel anything at all. And I was not willing to let that go without a fight. 10 years later. The summer sun bathed the gardens of Kingsley Abbey in golden light, and the lavender beds were in full bloom. Their fragrance drifted on the warm breeze, mingling with the sound of children's laughter. Felicity, Countess of Kingsley, stood on the terrace and watched her family with a heart so full it sometimes felt impossible to contain. Tristan was on the lawn below, attempting to teach their twin sons the rudiments of cricket. Edmund, who at 7 years old had inherited his father's dark hair and his mother's fierce green eyes, was wielding the bat with more enthusiasm than skill. Thomas, named for the beloved uncle he would never know, stood ready to bowl, his expression of intense concentration an exact replica of his father's. Charlotte, their eldest at 9, was perched in the branches of the old oak tree that had stood on these grounds for centuries. She had her mother's red hair and her father's cool gray eyes, and she was watching the cricket lesson with undisguised amusement. "Papa is making a terrible muddle of it," she called down. "He keeps telling Edmund to hold the bat properly, but Edmund does not care about proper. He cares about hitting things. Young ladies do not climb trees," Felicity called up to her daughter, though her voice held no real reproof. "I am not a young lady," Charlotte replied with perfect confidence. "I am an adventurer, and adventurers must survey their territory for hostile forces." "And what hostile forces do you see from up there?" "Only the Jennings boys from the village. They have been lurking near the orchard wall all morning, trying to steal apples." Charlotte's eyes narrowed with tactical consideration. "Shall I root them?" "Leave the Jennings boys to their apples. Your father needs all able-bodied troops for cricket duty." Charlotte considered this, then began her descent from the tree with the agile grace of long practice. "Very well, but only if I am allowed to bat. Edmund is dreadful." Down on the lawn, the game had deteriorated into chaos. Edmund had abandoned the bat in favor of chasing his twin around the wickets, and Tristan was watching their antics with an expression of helpless affection. He looked up as Felicity approached, and his face transformed into the smile that still made her heart skip after a decade of marriage. The silver at his temples had spread, and lines had appeared around his eyes from years of laughter and life. But he was more handsome now than he had been as the cold, distant Earl who had walked into her mother's drawing room so long ago. "Your daughter is impossible," he said as she reached him. "My daughter when she is clever and charming. Your daughter when she is stubborn and refuses to follow rules." "That seems unfair, given that she inherited both traits from you." Felicity laughed and slipped her arm through his. On the lawn, Edmund had caught Thomas and was sitting on him while Charlotte attempted to negotiate a peace treaty that would allow her to bat. "I never imagined this," Felicity said softly. "When you first came to our drawing room with your cold proposal, I never could have imagined that it would lead to this." "I could." Tristan pressed a kiss to her temple. "Not the specifics, perhaps, but I knew, even then, that you were extraordinary. That any life with you in it would be infinitely better than life without." Flatterer. Truth-teller. He turned her to face him, his gray eyes warm with love and mischief. "You burst into my life covered in mud, insulted me to my face, refused my proposal, tried to run away to Devon, and generally made everything as difficult as possible. And yet here we are." "Here we are," she agreed, "with 3 children who seem determined to terrorize the countryside, and a marriage that defies every expectation I ever had. Are you happy?" She considered the question seriously, as she always did. She thought about the years behind them, the challenges they had faced and overcome together. She thought about Eugenia, now happily remarried to a kind country gentleman who adored her. She thought about her mother, who had finally admitted, grudgingly, that Felicity had made the right choice. She thought about the Foundling Hospital, where she still volunteered when she could, now accompanied by her husband and often by their children. She thought about the man beside her, who had once been frozen by grief and fear, who had let her knock down his walls and teach him to feel again. "Yes," she said, "more happy than I ever believed possible." "Good." He kissed her, soft and sweet. "Because I intend to make you happy for at least another 50 years, and I needed to know I was on the right track." "Mama! Papa!" Charlotte's voice carried across the lawn. "Edmund has hit Thomas with the cricket bat, and Thomas is threatening revenge." Tristan sighed. "Duty calls." "So it does." Felicity squeezed his hand. "Come, my lord. Your children require intervention before they do each other permanent damage." They walked down to the lawn together, hand in hand as they had been for 10 years and as they would be for many more. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. On the terrace, the butler appeared, sounding the gong to announce that dinner was served. Edmund was not seriously injured, merely indignant. Thomas's revenge had been talked down to a mere threat. Charlotte had claimed the bat and was demonstrating proper form to both her brothers, who were ignoring her completely. It was chaotic and noisy and absolutely nothing like the quiet, controlled life Felicity had once imagined for herself. It was everything she had never known she wanted. As she looked around at her family, at the man she had chosen against all odds and the children they had created together, she thought about that young woman 10 years ago, the one who had sworn never to marry, never to trust, never to risk her heart. That woman would not recognize the life she had built. That woman would not believe it was possible. But that woman had been wrong about many things. Wrong about marriage, wrong about trust, wrong about the possibility of finding a partner who was truly her equal. Not impossible, merely waiting. Waiting for an arrogant earl who proposed in cold terms but loved in warm ones. Waiting for a man specific enough to choose only the woman who had insulted him to his face. Waiting for Tristan. The summer sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the lawn where her children played. The butler was waiting patiently by the door. Charlotte was explaining loudly that girls should absolutely be allowed to play cricket. Edmund and Thomas had formed a temporary alliance against their sister's superiority. It was messy and loud and utterly imperfect. It was everything. Felicity looked at Tristan, who was watching her with the expression of quiet wonder that still appeared on his face sometimes, as if he could not quite believe his good fortune. She smiled at him, and he smiled back, and she thought about how love was not always lightning and thunder. Sometimes it was built brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. Sometimes it grew in the spaces between arguments and misunderstandings, watered by honesty and trust and the willingness to be vulnerable. Sometimes it looked like a cold earl learning to play with orphan children, or a stubborn woman learning to believe she was worthy of partnership. Their love had been built that way, not in a moment of passion, but in months and years of shared work, shared grief, shared unexpected grace. It was the kind of love that thawed the coldest hearts, the kind that lasted. Walking toward the house with her family around her, and her husband's hand warm in hers, Felicity smiled. Because this was what it meant to live and love and finally, impossibly, find happiness. Complete chaos. Absolutely perfect. Exactly right. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories of love, resilience, and hope.